Loss harvesting. Why wealthy people love it, and you will too.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Brian, I am excited about this show because this is one of those things where not a lot of folks understand it. Not a lot of folks know how to do it correctly. And I think not a lot of folks recognize how valuable of a tool this can be in your financial tool belt.
Well, I think it's interesting. If you go on Google, you type in loss harvesting, you're going to notice a bunch of financial advisor content creators have posted all kind of articles. Because this is, I'm telling you, this is kind of inside baseball, behind the curtain of this is a tool that is very valuable when we reach these volatile periods. And that's something that I thought it was interesting when I was walking through and getting ready to do the show. And somebody said, "Hey, what's the show on today?" And I said, "Loss harvesting." I go, "Man, I am so sick of doing loss harvesting right now." And that shows how much I think professional financial advisors, if you're doing this right, if you know what this thing can do for you and what it cannot do for you, there is something about we're getting a lot of reps in this crazy financial year of 2022.
A true financial mutant understands how to capitalize on opportunities that are available to them, not just when things are good and positive and exciting, but also recognizes that there is opportunity in turbulence. There's opportunity in volatility. There's opportunity in fear. And loss harvesting is one of those things. So for those of you who don't know, maybe this is not something that you have heard of before. Maybe this is the first time you've interacted with this vocabulary. Loss harvesting is simply the timely selling of securities at a loss in order to offset taxable capital gains and potentially offset up to $3,000 of income. So your natural question might be, hey, why would I want to lock in losses? Why is that something that would be advantageous to me? Because when you lock in losses, you can actually use it to offset income, either this year or later this year or even in future years. So losses themselves can be incredibly valuable.
Well, I think about this in very upfront and getting to the basis of why this is powerful is that this is a lemons to lemonade situation or silver lining to the rainy clouds that we're facing with market volatility. As you can see from the definition, you get to, no matter what, if you don't have any gains to take in the current year, on your current tax return, you can take up to $3,000 off of ordinary income. For a lot of people, that's at least $1,000 in your pocket. So if you don't get anything out of the show, just knowing this strategy and this tool set might put $1,000 in your pocket while we're experiencing this volatile market environment.
So let's talk a little bit about the components. You know, what makes this possible? One of the reasons we're talking about this now, one of the reasons that this is a topic coming up in 2022 is that you need volatility present in order to harvest losses. You actually need the market to move in the negative direction. You need the value of your investments to go down to even make loss harvesting possible. A lot of our folks will ask us questions. They may have started working with us in a volatile year, a 2008 or a 2018, and we do some loss harvesting. Well, then we fast forward to the next is, hey guys, we're going to loss harvest this year. And we say, well, unfortunately, we're too good at what we do. We've made too much money this year. There are no losses to be had. So you have to have volatility. You have to actually have losses in your portfolio to be able to capitalize on those.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, our tax code, because this is all based upon what is tax policy, what are the rules that the IRS and Congress has set up. And we have a net policy, and the fact that you get to net your gains with your losses. And if you do have losses, because remember, we share this all the time, markets lose typically 2 out of 10 years. Now, fortunately, 8 out of 10 years we're rocking and rolling, making money. We get to cheer, celebrate, high five, and talk about how awesome things are. But in these down years, it is important to know we have this net process. And even if you have gains, you know, maybe, and by the way, this is something that's very important. It's not all investments. You might have an installment process where you sold some land or where you sold a business, or, you know, or you have real estate gains from some other transaction where you sold rental property or something like that because real estate market values are up. You can net even investment losses against those gains, and that's an important thing. But here's what I like, as we already shared in the example or the definition, you get to net at least $3,000. Even if you don't have the gains, you can take $3,000 off your taxes. But the thing that I think is if you have more losses than gains, it also carries forward indefinitely. So even if this is something that doesn't benefit you beyond the $3,000, this could benefit you going forward. And it's not like you have to use it or lose it in the next 2, 3, 4 years. You actually indefinitely could carry these losses forward.
So another component that you need when it comes to doing loss harvesting is you need to make sure that you have a stable of investment options that are similar but not identical substitutes. Because remember, what we're doing is when an investment loses value, we're going to sell it at a loss, but we're not going to stay there. We're not just going to sell it and go to cash and wait for the market to recover. We're going to sell it. We're going to buy something else. And that something else has to be materially different than the thing that we sold. I can't just sell stock X today and go buy stock X again tomorrow. You're going to run afoul of some tax law. And the tax law that you're going to run afoul of is called a wash sale. And very simply, this is a sale. When a sale occurs, when an investor sells or trades a security at a loss and buys the same, or and this is important, a substantially identical security within 30 days before or after the sale. So what you can't do is I'm just going to lock in this loss and tomorrow I'm going to go buy the stock right back. They're going to say that is not materially different enough to justify the sale. You aren't going to be able to actually utilize those losses.
Yeah, and I want you to pay attention because this wash sale is an important component of this. You need to understand this rule to really do loss harvesting well, because otherwise you could run afoul and then get all kind of weird disclosures on your monthly statements because they won't let you take the losses and you carry that forward as well. And a lot of people... And look, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you might be able to get away with it, but it's not the right way to do. And I always want you to be on the right side of the IRS because remember, they're the ones with the guns. They're the ones with the ability. They can just take your stuff if you do it wrong. So understand how wash sales rules work. That doesn't mean when we talk about substantial, it's substantially the same but not identical. It doesn't mean that you can sell Fidelity's S&P 500 and then go buy Vanguard's S&P 500 or sell the Schwab S&P 500 and then go buy the ETF of the S&P 500 because those are somewhat identical.
We'd argue those are identical holdings.
And I think you also have to be very careful. And there's been a lot of discussion on this. And you can probably get away with it, but it's not right. And I always want to try to give you the right guidance so you don't screw this up. I don't want you taking it in your taxable account and then going and putting it in your retirement account, the exact same holding. Yes, the IRS might not be able to track that individually, but if you ever got in an audit situation,
that would be against the rules.
If you were sitting across the table from that IRS agent, you would not want them asking those questions. So we're going to share with you the right ways to do this because there is an opportunity here when we talk about something similar, because there's nothing that says that just because you sell doesn't mean you can't go into something similar, but it's not identical, and take advantage of this very powerful tool.
Yeah, so we're just going to give a very easy example of a holding that most people house. Let's say that you hold the Vanguard 500 index. It's a U.S. large cap index that holds the 500 largest companies in this country, and it's market capitalization weighted. We already said you'd probably run afoul of the wash sale rule if you sold the Vanguard 500 and bought the Fidelity 500 or the iShares 500 or something else that's measured the same way and holds the same securities. But what you could do is you could sell the S&P 500 and go buy a total market index or a total market ETF or maybe one of the zero funds because they invest in a different bucket of securities than strictly the S&P 500. While there might be overlap, they are different enough that it would satisfy the wash sale rule. So one of the things you want to make sure you're doing is when you're analyzing what am I going to sell and what am I going to buy, do you actually know what's in those funds, what's in those ETFs, and could you justify to the IRS if they asked, hey, these are materially different enough that these are not substantially identical holdings?
I do want to make sure, because we're talking about the components of doing this loss harvesting. And we're going to talk about this as a risk or a bad, but I think it's worth making sure this concept comes up multiple times. when we do this strategy, you're trying to butt these transactions up as close to possible because you want to stay truly invested. I worry about the moral hazard or the behavioral hazard that somebody, because this is going to be scary, will sell and then go to cash and get into timing. This is not a timing strategy. This is a tool to help you take the volatility and actually harness the power of that for the benefit of your tax planning. It is not a strategy to get you in and back into the market from a timing perspective. You will run afoul of hurting yourself in the long term if you don't understand that concept. And Bo even has some better illustrations in a minute, but I want to make sure I put that component out there so you know we're doing this to stay invested.
That's right.
And use it as a tax strategy, not to time the market.
So let's talk about this. When does it make sense to do loss harvesting? When is it a prudent and practical strategy? Well, before we talk about when it does make sense, let's talk about some of the times when it does not make sense. And here's the obvious one. It doesn't make sense to try to do any sort of loss harvesting if you don't have any losses. If you've been someone who's been dollar cost averaging for the past couple of years on a low cost US based index fund, odds are, even though this year the market is down, your holding is probably still up. You probably still have embedded gains in that. So you have to actually have losses in order to be able to loss harvest.
Yeah, so that's something definitely to pay attention to. The other thing is, and now hopefully most of you are paying attention to transaction fees. This is only something I see with bigger accounts where you're trying to get into asset allocators or different asset classes. But typical equities should not have a lot of transaction fees. But let's just follow me on this journey in this example. I don't want you trying to harvest $300 to $1,000 worth of losses, but then paying a $35 to $50 transaction fee. That just seems like you're working against yourself with the cost, because as you'll see it later, you might do these transactions multiple times. So transaction costs definitely should be a component that you're paying attention to. Now, let me share with you, if you do have a large portfolio, yes, it might be worth paying the transaction fees, but for a lot of the smaller accounts, don't just do it because you want to be doing something sophisticated, but not actually get the benefit of it. So pay attention to those transaction fees.
And then the last thing, and again, this is where sometimes because we live in this, we take this as a given, but I think it's important to say, you can only loss harvest inside of taxable accounts. You cannot loss harvest inside of a Roth IRA or inside of a rollover IRA or a SEP IRA or a simple or a 401k. It only makes sense to do loss harvesting inside of taxable vehicles. So if you don't have an after-tax account, if you don't have that third bucket in your portfolio, loss harvesting is not something that will benefit you. It's not something you should be thinking about.
I think it's also important. If you go to moneyguy.com/resources, financial order of operations, there's a reason we do front load you on the retirement accounts for all those tax savings, because you're prioritizing the Roth, you're prioritizing the 401k match. There is a chance that some of you in your 20s and 30s won't have a lot of opportunity, but it is something you still should be very aware of. And that's why I'm glad that we're transitioning into what are the reasons why it does make sense. So as you get to step 7 of the financial order of operations, you get to hyperaccumulation, you can pay attention to the 3 buckets, because this will be very valuable to you.
So these are the things that you need in order for it to make sense. You need a taxable portfolio, an after-tax portfolio with meaningful losses. You actually have some losses you can go in there and grab, and you need those losses to exist inside of easily substitutable holdings. And we're going to talk more about this in a minute. It's not uncommon. Maybe you have a fund in your portfolio that does something very unique, and it serves a very unique and specific purpose. And if you were to sell out of that fund or move away from that manager, it would be difficult for you to replace that exposure. Well, we all know markets can move, and they can move quickly. And what you don't want to do is move out of a fund that you love into a fund that maybe you don't love or a subpar. The market rebounds rapidly and has that 12, 14% run up inside of the first month. And then you're trapped inside that fund that you did not want to be in. So you want to make sure you have a viable substitute for any holding that you are loss harvesting. To say that a little bit differently, not every holding should be loss harvested. Just because you have a loss does not mean you should harvest it. You only want to harvest those losses inside of holdings that are easily replicable across another set of holdings.
Another indicator that this might really make sense to you is if you're charitably minded. You know, Bo started off this segment talking about that if you've been investing for over 3 to 4 years, more than likely your portfolio, especially if it's index funds, it's still a gain, even with the recent market volatility, just because you've been invested, you've had enough gains. Because remember, we know markets lose money 2 out of 10 years, so that 8 out of 10 years that it's positive, you're making money off of that, and there's a chance that you're not going negative to even use this tool. But if you're charitably minded, we have a strategy in a minute we're going to share with you where you can actually, over time, increase your basis by harnessing the power of loss harvesting with charitable giving strategies so that you can, even if you are a long-term investor who's been doing this 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years, there's a way to push your basis up in a strategic way. So
let's talk about a very simple example. Everything we've talked about here has been sort of theoretical and academic. Let's look at a real life example. So let's say that Hank has $100,000 invested in the Vanguard Small Cap Index on January 1st, and this specific holding is held inside of his after-tax account. Well, the markets do what sometime markets do, and let's say that by June 30th, that holding is down 20% by June 30th. Hank says, you know what, I'm going to go loss harvest. I'm going to sell the Vanguard Small Cap Index, and I'm going to go buy the iShares Small Cap ETF. I look to see what indices they track and what the underlying holdings are, and I've determined that they are materially different enough to justify a replacement. They are not substantially identical. So I'm going to sell VB and I'm going to go buy IJR and I'm going to lock in those $20,000 in losses. Well, then the market gains back 25%. So it lost 20, then it gains back 25. And because they are in the same asset class, they move relatively close. We're going to talk about that in a second. Hank actually ends up back at the same point he would have been had he did nothing. He had 100,000, he wrote it down to 80,000, he wrote it back up to 100,000. But because he employed loss harvesting, he now has $20,000 in losses that he clipped at the bottom that he can use to offset any capital gains that he has this year. He can offset up to $3,000 of ordinary income, and if he doesn't use all of his losses, he can carry them forward indefinitely. He did not change his investment strategy. He did not change his investment structure. He simply took advantage of the opportunity that was there via loss harvesting.
Well, I think somebody who's never done this being like, man, there were some transactions that occurred there. There were some calories burned to do this. What's the benefit? Because if you started at 100, as you guys just showed the round trip, you ended up at the end of the year with 100. Why even go through all this work? And here's the point I want to make. I covered this earlier. That $3,000 that everyone would get to take off of you to offset ordinary income of capital losses, that could be in your pocket $1,000. So at a minimum, that $20,000 loss could be $1,000. So instead of having $100,000 at the beginning of the year, now you have 101 if you think about it in terms of after the tax benefits. But there are people out there, as I shared earlier also, you might have other income sources. Right. You know, you did an installment sell where there's a capital gains coming in over a long period of time. You sold some property. This is going to be huge. If you had a $20,000 loss and you had that income coming in, if you're in those higher tax brackets, if you think state income taxes, federal income taxes, there is a chance that out of that $20,000 loss, you actually get to put $10,000 in your pocket because there could be a 50% tax benefit for the highest income tax individuals. This is powerful. Now you're starting to get lick your chops a little bit and going, man, I went round trip, have the exact same amount of money, but just by doing this simple transaction, I have an additional $10,000. Now I'm at $110,000 because I actually did the hard work of turning this tax strategy into a lower taxable situation for me and my family.
Now, this is a very simple example we just walked through. We walked through kind of this case study where the market lost 20% and we conveniently sold at the very bottom and then conveniently it recovered right away. Well, we know the real world doesn't actually work like that. So how does this play out in the real world? And before we talk about a strategy, like a real life actual strategy you could be employing, it's important to have some context. You guys have seen this chart before, but what this chart lays out for you is all of the bear markets and all the bull markets from 1942 all the way through this year. The length of the market shows how long it lasted, and then the depth or the height of it shows how severe it was. So what you can see here is that more often than not, bull markets are substantially more severe in a positive way than bear markets.
Severe sounds so negative.
I know, but I'm trying to
bull
think.
markets are awesome.
They're awesome, more awesome than bear market. But see, that's just kind of a given, more awesome than bear markets. The gravity through which you experience a bull market way outpaces the gravity which you experience in a bear market, and they tend to last for a lot longer of a period of time. So even when you're going through periods of volatility like this, it's important to remember that. It's important to keep that archive in the back of your mind.
Well, that's why here's the optimist take of this. And Bo's already thrown out one of my slides, but this is a way for me to put it back in for Daniel's benefit too, is that we know that fortunately bull markets last much longer and happen more frequently than bear markets. So I think that this puts a priority on the fact that when we do have that 2 out of 10 years, you ought to be like a squirrel who's harvesting and putting a bunch of nuts to save for the winter, because there will be really good gains in the future. So the harder you work while things are cold outside, and you're harvesting, and just say that you will see that the benefit for this for many years in the future. You are filling up that silo of losses. That's one of the things I'm telling you, me personally, I'm talking about my personal portfolio, plus what we do for all of our clients. I've done this at least twice this year because I take it very serious, and we're going to have an example of how that boom bust cycle works. This is not a set it and forget it one and done. This is something that you actually can use this strategy throughout the volatility of the market, so that as we come through this short-lived bear market, you will be able to hit the ground running and really have a really strong tax strategy for when things are good too.
But you got to be a financial mutant. You have to recognize that these opportunities don't happen all the time. You can see in the chart that we just showed that bear markets don't happen all that frequently, despite what the financial media might suggest to you. So when we have these large drawdowns like what we're seeing this year, it makes a lot of sense to capitalize on them. It makes a lot of sense to be able to take advantage of them. So let's do a real world live case study based on something that could have happened this year, in the year 2022. So let's say that Jasmine has $100,000 invested in an S&P 500 index ETF on January 1st of 2022. Let's also assume this holding is held inside of her taxable brokerage account. She decides that, man, this year has been volatile and I'm going to take advantage of loss harvesting. So every time my holding drops by $10,000, I'm going to go harvest those losses. And if you look from January through September, that occurred in February and then it occurred again in June. So here's the practical nature of what Jasmine did. On February 23rd, she sells her S&P 500 ETF to harvest a little over $11,000 of losses. She then takes the proceeds from that sell and immediately buys a total market index ETF so as not to violate the wash sale rules. They are similar but not identical. Well, then, if you remember, she starts feeling pretty good. Second quarter started off pretty nice. She's thinking, oh, wow, this worked. I lost harvest and market started making money. And then the shoe dropped. And then it happened again. And then the market in the second quarter continued to drop. And so then she decides, you know what? On June 13th, I have crossed over that $10,000 loss mark again. So now, on June 13th, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell my total market index. I'm going to harvest another $10,600 of losses. And because it's been 30 days since I last did that transaction, I'm going to buy back into the S&P 500 index fund now. So I own the S&P. I got out of it. I rode in the total market. It lost money too. I harvested that loss. Now I got back in the S&P 500.
Well, I think that's interesting, Bo. If you could just bring up the visual again, a lot of people, the naysayers or the I'll just call them the trolls under the bridge that are going to come out in the comments section, they'll say, guys, why'd you do all these trades? Why wouldn't you just wait until June and just buy them? Well, you do this loss harvesting one time in June when it was at the lowest. And it's exactly what you shared. And that's why I feel like I'm just giving the commentary of answering the unspoken part, is that we never know when markets are going to recover. If you think about like the pandemic of what happened in 2020, the market got crushed, went down that 35%, but then shot off like a rocket. We harvested losses in that downturn, but then we hit recovery mode so fast that if you were trying to wait for the second or even the third, so you reach the dead bottom, you might have missed it.
That's right.
So we don't remember. None of us have the crystal ball of knowing what's going on and when the full recovery, because there might be some false positives or false recoveries that occur in any bear market. Even in 2008, if you remember, after the election season of 2008, the market actually closed up at the end of the year, not for the year. It was still down 37%, but it was at a low of over 50% down, but then it closed down 37% because it did have a 10 to 15% recovery right after the election cycle before we went right back down to and tested the bottoms of January through March of 2009. It's not uncommon to have those fits and starts where things look like they're getting better. That's why you might do this multiple times in a year, is because you think you're at a bottom, you harvest losses, we have a temporary recovery, then we fall even lower, you harvest again. I know it's creating work for you, but it shows up and it does create value over the long term. Pay attention to these cycles.
And so where is Jasmine net? So through October 12th of this year, she's harvested $21,700 in losses. Now, what those losses can do is they can offset capital gains this year. If she offsets all of her capital gains, they can offset $3,000 of ordinary income, and anything left over can move into future years. And in those future years, it can offset capital gains, or it can offset up to $3,000 of capital losses. Of ordinary income. A lot of people don't realize, well, I don't want to harvest any more loss. I've harvested plenty. Remember, bull markets last for a long time, and you can have a down year where, man, it feels painful, but the next year's pretty good, and you can use those losses. And the next year's pretty good, and you can use those losses. It's not uncommon to be able to harvest losses in one year that can offset triggered gains for the next number of years. You're basically getting to invest your portfolio tax-free, which is a super, super awesome thing to be able to do.
Well, it's not uncommon. Look, I'm going to talk in reality here from a financial planner, is that for 7-figure portfolios, it's going to be a 6-figure loss that you've harvested. And you're like, well, why would, $3,000 is all I can offset. Are we really going to take $100,000, $200,000 of losses that we're just going to carry forward? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because there will be some years in the future where you're going to have distributions at year end, or you have some big transaction yourself. You're going to be so thankful that you had the losses to offset those gains. So you got to essentially experience the recovery without having to pay the taxes on all those distributions. But I do think this is probably a great time to segue into, are there any downsides? Are there negative things that you need to talk about with loss harvesting?
And I have a downside I'm going to throw in here. Now, Brian, this is in the show notes, but this is why I love having this live chat, because it's so valuable. I can actually see what you guys are saying right now. And a lot of people are asking this question, Brian, and I know that you're going to know the answers. Hey, okay, well, how do I track? You said I can carry forward losses, but how do I keep track of my losses? Like, do I have to keep a spreadsheet and a file, some way to do that? And after I've offset $3,000 of income on a tax return, like, how will I remember next year that I have losses that I can use? Like, what's the tracking mechanism to even make that possible?
Well, look, we don't mind giving you the instruction manual or the toolbox to do this stuff. But this is another one of those, I tell you, success creates complexity. And this is why working with a financial advisor, because we're actually tracking this for our clients. We're doing the implementation. We're tracking it because this is something that you will want to pay attention to. This is another thing, by the way, coming from a tax preparation background. I did taxes for 16 years. This is one of the reasons you don't want to be jumping around to different CPAs every year or different tax preparation software every year, is because we all have, you might not even realize it, more carry forwards in the background than you realize. Like if you ever paid alternative minimum taxes, if you have these loss carry forwards, this is why it's good to be consistent with who you're letting in to help you manage, because that consistency allows you to we're all on the same page. We know what the carry forwards are. We as a financial advisor, this is one of the main things when somebody hires us. I always say, hey, let us also see your tax returns for the last few years. We're going back and just making sure, did all those carry forwards actually happen?
That's right.
Are they being reported correctly? Because that stuff is so important. And this is some of the mistakes I see people make when they just, in a flippant way, will say, I didn't like how that CPA talked to me. They seemed so busy, or they just didn't seem like they had it figured out. And then they hire somebody else. Or maybe this is a reason you should fire your CPA, is that they're not tracking this stuff for you. And your investment advisor is not going back to make sure that all these boxes were checked. This is important stuff, but you have to have a plan and you have to be consistent with how you're carrying out that plan so that these things aren't being left on the sideline, because the government's not doing this for you. It's requiring you to be proactive in your financial life.
So that's one downside, is there is some tracking mechanism. But if you're using a consistent accountant or you're using a consistent accounting software, I know a lot of the major providers, they'll naturally do it for you. They'll naturally bring your carry forwards forward into these years. We've already talked about this. Wash sales can happen. It's a real thing. So you want to make sure. Now, what happens when you have a wash sale? It's not like you get a citation or a penalty or a fine. It's just a transaction doesn't serve any benefit for you. They end up adjusting the basis in your new holding by the amount of the wash sale. So that whole strategy you try to take advantage of serves you no purpose. They just do a mathematical calculation where it nets zero to you and you receive no benefit from it. The other thing, and Brian, you alluded to this a little bit, is when you're loss harvesting, it's during volatile periods. It's during periods when your holdings are down and valuable. And frankly, that can be pretty emotional.
Yeah, a lot of people, I mean, this is the part, because I've shared this in the fact that buying low, selling high actually is more painful than people realize. It's easy to say in your TikTok video, just buy low, sell high. But the thing I always remind people is that buy low moment is probably when there's going to be blood in the streets, and the fact economically there's going to be, high interest rates, there's going to be down stock markets, there's going to be a crazy, employment marketplace, there's going to be all kind of weird things going on that you're going to feel somewhat uncertain on, should you even do this? So what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to start off saying, I'm going to take advantage of this strategy, but then as you're implementing, you hit the sell button to lock in the loss, but then you don't do the step 2, which is you have to buy something that is not the same, but still allows you to invest and put that money to work, because this is not a timing strategy. This is a tax strategy. And I think that that's something I do worry about, because there's risks there that you might be so nervous. They're like, this guy sounded so confident, but then you get halfway through and be like, maybe I'll just sit in cash. If cash feels so comfortable. I had a phone call yesterday, and that client was like, man, I see that every asset class is getting crushed, but I see cash is at least making money. I was like, is cash making money though? Yes, you can get 2.5% to 3% on your cash if it's in, a money market or a high yield savings account. But if the purchasing power, as we just heard, the data is updated from 8.2 to 8.3% year over year. I was like, you're actually still losing, at least with the stock market. Yes, it's negative right now, but the recovery cycle, that rubber band effect, at least gives you the purchasing power opportunity of the long term to stay ahead of inflation. That's something I always have to remind people. From our research, I believe from 2000 to 2022, no, it was 1980 to 2022, the financial markets have stayed above inflation by 8.9%. I mean, so that's tremendous over the long term. I know it feels scary right now because you feel like you're getting a double whammy of inflation plus your volatility in the stock market. But my big thing is give you the tools, but tell you stay the course and actually do step 2, which is buy into that other investment so you stay fully invested.
Another downside that you want to be aware of when you are loss harvesting is that tracking error matters. Remember, we keep talking about how you cannot buy an identical security, but you want things that kind of move together. This is a horrible example, but I'm going to use some individual stocks to kind of give you a feel for this, right? Think about a Home Depot and Lowe's. They are similar, not identical. Pepsi and Coke. They are similar, not identical. Well, what you want to make sure of is when you're making these loss harvesting decisions, you understand what tracking error exists between the substitutes you're using. And why are you laughing?
because I don't know why you chose those, but I would have been like Mr. Pibb versus Dr. Pepper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking...
Mr. Pibb. There's a reason he ain't a doctor. He is not the same as Dr. Pepper. Keep going. That was just a Brian. My brain just goes in weird places. Keep going.
Look at these holdings. These are 3 large cap holdings. We have the S&P 500. Then we have a fund that a lot of you see in your 401k called Dodge and Cox stock. And then there's another fund that a lot of you may see in your 401k called the American Funds Growth Fund of America. All 3 of these are classified as U.S. large cap holdings. One has a value tilt, one has a growth tilt, one has a blend tilt. Even though they're investing in similar sized companies and similar types of markets, you can see that what they have done in 2022 has been very different. You would suggest that there is a significant amount of tracking error between these 3 funds. So if you are loss harvesting and you get it wrong, maybe you sell the bad performing fund and you buy the good performing fund at the wrong time, or vice versa, you may be impeding your overall investment strategy.
I think this chart is fascinating to me because if you look at it, I think it's worth to just draw attention to it. The S&P 500 actually sits right in between. We know this is the index that tracks, it's kind of a blend of large cap.
Yep.
It's both value as well as growth stocks that make up the S&P 500. I think it's interesting that in your example here of tracking error, Dodge and Cox stock is a value tilted. You can see it's actually done better because conservative stuff does better. The American Funds Growth Fund of America has a growth tilt on it. It got hammered because of that growth tilt, and that's why it's just interesting because they're running in very similar. I mean, it almost. If these were EKGs, you'd be like, oh, those are similar heart rates. But there is enough difference there because one is value, one's growth, and then that it's like the Goldilocks of the S&P 500 is right in the middle of them.
I love it. So make sure you understand how closely the 2 things that you're substituting track one another. And then here's the last one. And this is the one we always get some hate on, Brian, right? Whenever we've talked about loss harvesting in the past and taking advantage of it, the internet trolls will come out and say, but guys, you did not think about the fact that you're just resetting your basis. While you may be harvesting some losses now, all you're doing is just setting yourself up for bigger taxes later, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you invested $100,000 and you did this whole loss harvesting when it went down $20,000 to $80,000, when it goes back up to $100,000, if you just done nothing, you're kind of at the exact same place. The person who sold at $80,000, you're like, now you created a $20,000 gain for yourself on paper, and that offsets. So you really have done absolutely nothing for yourself. But that's why I wanted to make sure I like money in hand today versus money in hand in the future. And what loss harvesting does allow you to do from a strategy standpoint is that even if you don't have gains to offset, you get that $3,000 that offsets ordinary income. If you do have gains coming in, I love that it's offsetting ordinary income. I love that because that's the thing. When these losses, you get to take them. It doesn't matter if they're short-term, long-term. They get to offset ordinary income. They get to offset short-term capital gains, which are treated as ordinary income from a tax perspective. I love the fact that it lets you maximize that strategy. So yes, I would rather, it's true, eventually the government's going to get their money. They're going to come out in the same taxable situation when all things are sold. But why not, if I can get $1,000 today, if I can on the $3,000, or if I can use all $20,000 and get $10,000 today, that $10,000 in my hand today could be put to work somewhere else. There's an opportunity, not cost, but an opportunity to actually deploy that money for my benefit. And in the wealth building, those little steps, is what is the difference in the journey that gives you that little bit of an edge. I've seen people say over the long term, this could equate to about a 1% per year performance advantage if you are employing this type of strategy. That's something to be mindful of. So
let's talk about, if these are the downsides, what are some ways that we can eliminate them? Or what are some ways that we can combat them? We've already talked about with wash sales and tracking error, you want to make sure you have an understanding of your substitutes. With emotionality, you want to make sure that you know yourself. If you're someone, when you go log into your brokerage account and you see a $100,000 loss, it's going to freak you out. Maybe loss harvesting is not for you. Maybe that's not something that you should be doing. And if you're someone who's concerned about resetting your basis and buying in lower and having future embedded gains, there are even some ways that we can help, that we could think of how to offset this. And Brian, the very first one, I think this is one of your favorites. This is one of like if you are a financial mutant out there, this is a really exciting way to flip the script on the way that you track your financial matters.
Well, I'm going to share. I don't think she wants me to say her name because it might share too much. But I have a financial advisor here that I know is very generous to charity, and she's been so proud. This is because this is ongoing. But I remember when we all started working together, and she was working here. She was sharing that her family loves taking advantage of the credit card rewards on their charitable giving, like to their tithes to the church and so forth. And then I love the fact that I have shown the math of this, that I have converted them from charitable rewards points on their credit card to now they're doing this loss harvesting in conjunction with paying it forward with resetting your basis. So here's how this works, guys. We showed that you can do loss harvesting. And Bo, I think it's better because I could go through the theory, but I think it's better if you actually do a case study to walk them through what this actually looks like.
So if you're someone who's charitably inclined, let's think about Jasmine from our earlier example. For those of you that don't remember, Jasmine decided throughout 2022 she was going to loss harvest every time her account lost $10,000. So through selling and buying something similar but not identical, she was able to harvest $21,700 of losses. Well, now let's assume that the market turned. She's back in that S&P 500 fund, and over the next year, it makes 40%. Brian, why did we pick 40% as the number that she makes over the next year?
Well, because we know that, once again, the pluck effect. If we're going down fast, the recovery is going to come back fast. So that is the average rate of return you get from the dead bottom of a down market to 1 year in the future from that down market. Typically, it recovers about 40%.
So she makes 40% in her account over the next year. Now, let's also assume that Jasmine is charitably minded. She likes to give $10,000 to her favorite charity every year. And normally what she does is she just writes a check out of her checking account to her favorite charity. However, she started listening to the Money Guy show, and she watched this episode in particular and said, you know what? I'm going to try that. Instead of me giving $10,000 to my favorite charity from my checking account, I'm going to gift an appreciated security. So I'm going to donate directly from my brokerage. When I do that, when Jasmine gives $10,000 of her S&P 500 fund to her charitable giving fund, she immediately gets a $10,000 tax deduction. What's great about that $10,000 tax deduction is $2,857 of that was earnings that she made in the account that she's never paid tax on. Yeah, that she has never paid any tax on.
This is the part that gets me giddy because I think about the fact that I'm giving $10,000 to charity, but I only paid $7,000. So essentially, I'm giving $7,000 to charity that's turned into $10,000. It's a win-win for everyone.
Right.
It's a win for the charity because they get the full $10,000 benefit. It's a win for me and my family because I only paid $7,000 for that thing. So that $3,000 is kind of magical, pixie dust gains. Yep. I love that. This is a very powerful. There's more to this though.
But maybe Jasmine's still an accumulator. Remember, her account after the recovery was worth $109,000, and now she's given away $10,000 of it, so her account's only worth $99,000. But remember, every year she was writing a check to her charity for $10,000. Well, now that she's gifted the security, she can now take the $10,000 that she was going to give to the charity, and she can go today buy the S&P 500 fund. So now she goes back to having $109,000 of exposure inside of the S&P 500. This is what in effect happened. She was able to increase her basis by $2,857 through contributing an appreciated security to a charitable giving fund and then replacing that security at today's price inside of her account. She essentially bought back in today and increased her basis. Instead of having $78,000 of basis, she now has $81,000 of basis inside of her S&P 500 folding.
Remember what we shared earlier at the beginning of the show? We said, if you've been investing more than 3 to 4 years, there's a good chance, even with the bear market we're in where the market's down 25%, you haven't gone negative. You still have gains in your portfolio. What I like about this strategy, especially if you're somebody who gives consistently, maybe it's a tithe or you give this to organizations that you're supporting every year. If you do this, you're basically dollar cost averaging what you would be giving to charity because you're giving appreciated holdings. You're then replenishing what you gave back into that account. Effectively, think about if you're doing this monthly, like you are pushing up that basis over time. So instead of in 3 years you get to use this, you're making it where your basis is going up. Now, a lot of you are like, well, where does that also come into play? What if you came across a piece of property, chance of a lifetime to buy this, either to upgrade your house or it's an investment that you want to get into, a business, a piece of real estate. If your basis is higher in your taxable account, it's easier for you to get into it without generating more taxes, because you would be surprised how many people won't touch accounts because of the tax impact of getting to that money. This is a hack. This is why wealthy people love these strategies, is because it is pushing that basis up to make this money more accessible to you.
Now, Brian, maybe you're out there saying, okay, guys, I love that, but I'm not really charitably minded, or that doesn't fit into my plan or my strategy. You say, so does that mean that it's all bad for me? I lost harvested and now I have this lower basis and I'm going to pay those capital gains at some point in the future. Is that always true?
Well, this is why there's a second option. Bonus points territory here is because we talk, maybe if you're not charitably minded, maybe you're just in a high tax situation now, but you have the thought process when you retire, some point in the future, you're not going to have that earned income. Your tax rate's going to be much, much lower than it is right now. You're not going to be in the 37% anymore. You're going to drop down to in the 20s, the low 20s. If that's or even better, because think about this. If you paid attention, moneyguy.com/resources, hyper accumulation, step 7, we talk about the 3 bucket strategy. If you do this right, there's a chance that you get to legally manipulate the tax code to where you know exactly what your taxable income is going to be, because you're controlling the income structure. There's a unique thing in the tax code called 0% capital gains. It's for people, if you're single, it's $41,000 worth of income, up to $41,000 of income. For joint filers, it's up to $83,000 worth of income. What if you're in the tippity top tax bracket, you retire, no more earned income coming in, you're below these 2 thresholds? What if you took and you actually now strategically took capital gains to maximize that 0%?
0%.
That's a win, guys.
Absolutely.
You basically, instead of paying, because think about it, if you're in the highest tax bracket, we love long-term capital gains because it's, for high-income people, it's not 15%, it's 20%, but then you have to stack on top of that the 3.8% for that Medicare surcharge. Then you have to stack on top of that, state income taxes, other things. If you can take advantage of this situation, you can off the top just cut 24%. Out of there. That's an incredible long-term benefit. It really is.
Guys, we know that this is sort of in the nitty-gritty. This is the dirty stuff. And frankly, the reason we want you to know about this is because this is the kind of stuff that financial mutants do. Now, this strategy alone is not what's going to take you to financial independence. You're not going to loss harvest your way into wealth. I mean, we keep making this joke with clients. As much as we love loss harvesting, we're ready to see some gains inside the portfolio. We're ready to start seeing more green. That's a lot more fun. But if you can be a financial mutant, if you can take advantage of these strategies and you can optimize even in down markets and you can learn how to turn lemons into lemonade, you are going to reach financial independence that much faster. You're going to structure your financial life that much more efficiently so that you can make your dollars work that much more effectively.
Well, I think I'll put it in terms of racing and the fact that I always am amazed that you can talk about foot racing, you can talk about auto racing. That I'm always amazed that if you look at 1 second difference in performance, but then you get enough time, that all of a sudden the car or the person is lapping the people, and that's exactly what we're giving you. This is a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of a benefit that's going to allow you to add that little extra difference of performance every year, because this is going to be a tool in your wealth building strategy. But you do this enough and over a long enough period of time, 10, 20, 30 years in the future, This is a lot of
It's a
money.
big deal.
You're lapping your competition. You're lapping your peers because you were a financial mutant. You took advantage of this. I thought it was, you said this is kind of in the dirty part of it. I don't know when nerdy became dirty, but
meant like the
but I love
nitty-gritty dirty part.
I knew exactly. That's that whole nitty gritty thing. But it is one of those things. This is the difference that's going to put you ahead. Don't overlook the small stuff. I think so many incremental decisions that we make, just like, we hear about the latte effect and we make fun of if you get a lot of enjoyment out of coffee. I'm not trying to turn you away from doing those little things, but maybe this is that little element that if you stack these little things up, they have a huge impact that does allow you to overcome. If you like, living a certain way, this is something that gets you to your goals faster so you can enjoy yourself. All these tools and techniques are to liberate you to live your best financial life.
If you want to know more about the stuff that we do, if you want to have access to more of our resources, if you've not checked it out, go to moneyguide.com/resources. We have a whole resource page there for you. If you want to do some deep dives into some of our courses, like Know Your Number, the financial order of operations, or maybe you just want to start tracking your net worth, and this would be a great year to start doing that, go to learn.moneyguide.com to check that out.
Guys, I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen, Money Guy team, out.